Welcome back, sleepyheads. You always seem to arrive right on time. Before Silas steps beneath the towers, a word from the voice behind the clock. You know, the one who winds these walks and lets them breathe. I chose Notre Dame before the fire because this is what endurance looks like, right before it learns how fragile it truly is. 8 centuries of faith, stone, and human ambition standing quietly in the dark, unaware of the spark that waits in the future. It's a perfect place for a quiet walk, not because nothing happens here, but because everything has and won't forever. If you enjoy drifting through moments that remind us nothing lasts, but everything matters, ease in, join the sleepy circle. Let's begin.
Chapter 1 Footsteps on Sacred Stone. Welcome in, listeners. I'm Silas, your slightly sleep-deprived tour guide through time, architecture, and humanity's ongoing attempt to impress whatever might be watching. If you enjoy my voice softly narrating our most dramatic chapters while you fall asleep in sweatpants, go ahead and like the video. It helps more dreamers stumble into these walks. Subscribe, tap the bell, and tell me where you're listening from. I promise I won't stalk you, unless you're hiding somewhere inside a Gothic cathedral after closing time, in which case, congratulations, we're co-workers now. I let the night breathe for a beat. Now, take a slow breath in. Let it out. We're going back to a different Paris than the one with selfie sticks and overpriced lattes. The year doesn't matter so much tonight as the feeling. A city wrapped in twilight, the Seine moving like a dark ribbon at its feet, and at the center of the island, a stone, giant that has watched empires rise, collapse, and rebrand as tourist districts. Notre Dame. The first thing I feel is the cold. It rolls up from the Seine and across the Parvis, the wide forecourt in front of the cathedral, in a long, steady breath. Not harsh exactly, just insistent, the kind of cold that has seen too many winters to bother being dramatic about it. It slides under my coat, curls around my ankles, and decides it lives here now. Mist curls low over the cobblestones, turning the square into a stage where the last of the day's footprints are slowly being erased. The street lamps glow in soft halos, reflected in shallow puddles like coins tossed into a tired fountain. Pigeons, because it's Europe, and of course there are pigeons, fuss around in sleepy clusters, puffed up against the chill. They hop, preen, and regard me with the deep, judgmental suspicion of tiny French critics who've read too much philosophy and not enough hygiene manuals. I stand there for a moment and just let the place move around me. To my left, the dark silhouette of the Seine drifts past, carrying the light of the city in broken streaks. To my right, the outline of Paris stretches away, apartment windows glowing like private constellations, the faint murmur of cars, a stray laugh floating across the night. But the Parvis itself feels oddly suspended, like a pause in the middle of a sentence. People have crossed this open square for almost 9 centuries. Pilgrims, kings, merchants, revolutionaries, tourists with guidebooks and terrible footwear, lovers arguing softly, thieves arguing less softly, skeptics who came for the architecture and accidentally bumped into spirituality in the nave. Most of them never stopped long enough to notice that they were walking over 850 years of compressed time. Tonight, we do. My boots click softly over the stones as I start toward the cathedral. The facade rises ahead of me, not just a building but a kind of stone mountain someone carved theology into. In the mist, the towers don't look entirely solid. They loom, then fade, then loom again as if they're being redrawn each time I blink. Up close, the west facade is almost too much to take in all at once. 3 great portals yawn at the base, framed in arches dense with carved saints, angels, sinners, monsters, and a handful of stone faces that look suspiciously like medieval inside jokes. Above them, the gallery of kings stretches across the front like a row of stone judges, expressionless and tired of everyone's nonsense. Higher still, the rose window stares out, a massive, dark circle for now, waiting for daylight to catch fire in its glass, and above that, the twin towers stand like bookends holding up the sky. I stop halfway across the Parvis and tilt my head back. The mist slides around the towers like slow breath. The statues along the facade blur and sharpen as the fog shifts, giving the impression that they're inching closer when I'm not looking, which, to be fair, is exactly the kind of thing Notre Dame would do if it were bored. The wind rises a little, curling around the buttresses and balconies, weaving through the rows of gargoyles and chimeras perched along the ledges. The creatures were never meant to be friendly, but tonight they're downright theatrical. Their shadows stretch and twist along the stone, thrown by lamps and moonlight at awkward angles. One particular gargoyle, a hunched thing with wings and the attitude of a disgruntled bat, casts a shadow that slides slowly along the facade. As the wind shifts, the shadow stretches, elongates, and for a second it looks like its head turns to track me, neck twisting unnaturally across stone. I stop walking. Well, that's comforting, I murmur. Medieval security systems. No Wi-Fi, but excellent judgment. The shadow eases back into place as the wind dies, leaving the gargoyle in its original pose, mouth open in a permanent, silent scream or laugh, hard to say which. Most old things seem to blur those two. I take another few steps forward, boots muffled now by the carpet of worn stone, right in the center of the Parvis. I pause again and let my eyes travel slowly up the facade. This isn't just a pretty church. This is a survival story carved in limestone. It's seen riots, coronations, revolutions, occupations, neglect, restoration, scandal, tourists with loud shirts, and bored teenagers vaping in the shadow of the apse. It's watched France reinvent itself so many times you'd think the country was being paid per identity change. And through it all, the cathedral remained, imperfect, wounded, patched, but standing. For now, the air feels heavier for a moment, layering itself with the ghost of what I know will happen someday, but the building doesn't yet. The future, hanging just out of reach like a match someone hasn't struck. Not tonight, I tell the stone under my breath. Tonight you're whole. The facade doesn't respond, because obviously it has better manners than I do. I move closer toward the central portal. The carved figures along the arch seem to lean forward in their niches, robes hanging in stiff, stylized folds, eyes gazing down at me with that peculiar medieval stare, somewhere between compassion and a stern lecture. Under their gaze, I feel suddenly small in a way that isn't entirely unpleasant, like being reminded that most of the things I worry about are very, very short-term problems. The wind sweeps across the square again, gentler this time, and the gargoyle shadows along the towers stretch, collapse, and stretch again. On the upper levels, the chimeras look like they're whispering to one another, heads bent toward the city they've been observing for centuries. I'm just starting to think that maybe the night will let us pass quietly when it happens. The bell, just one. A single, sudden toll from somewhere high above, deep and resonant enough to rattle the bones of the courtyard. The sound drops like a hammer out of the sky, slamming the air flat for an instant. It reverberates through my chest, down into my ribs, into the stones at my feet, and, if I'm honest, a little into my nervous system. I flinch. I won't lie to you. It feels like being politely punched by God. The pigeons explode into the air in a shattered grey cloud, wings flapping frantically. A faint cascade of dust sifts down from one of the carved ledges, drifting in the lantern light like ancient snow. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn answers, absurdly small. Subtle, I whisper up at the towers. Very subtle. No one could possibly miss that you're here. The bell's echo bounces between the facades of nearby buildings, dissolving slowly into a low hum that seems to linger inside my ears. For a few seconds after the sound fades, the entire square feels even quieter, as if the city is waiting to see if there will be another toll. There isn't. Just one note, a full stop at the end of a sentence. I exhale slowly and let my shoulders drop. I picture the bell itself, massive and ancient, swaying in its wooden frame inside the North Tower, bronze that has outlived wars and weather, swinging on beams that were lifted into place by hands that have been dust for 600 years. It's an odd thing, knowing that sometime in the future the world will watch flames lick that same tower, that same frame. But tonight, the bell is simply a bell, loud, righteous, and very sure of its purpose. The mist creeps in again, wrapping the base of the towers in soft grey. The pigeons, offended but adaptable, return to the stones in smaller, warier clusters. I start walking again, closing the last stretch between myself and the facade. From this distance, I can see the smaller details, the chipped noses of saints, the softened edges where centuries of rain have worn sharp lines into rounded sighs. Some figures look weary, some serene, some oddly amused, as if even saints can't help but find humanity's drama a little excessive. I reach out just once and lay my fingertips lightly against the base of a column. The stone is colder than the air, solid and indifferent. It has felt countless hands before mine, devout, curious, desperate, bored. In another time, there would have been lines, guards, signs about flash photography and pickpockets. Tonight, it's just me and a building that has no intention of revealing how many heartbeats it has watched end inside its walls. 8.5 centuries, I murmur. You've seen more endings than I've seen alarm clocks. A faint gust cuts across the square, tugging at my coat and making the banners near the entrance flutter. The gargoyle shadows twitch again, shifting just enough to make it look like something along the upper walls has turned to look toward the river, as if sensing a future it can't quite see. There's something profoundly unfair, but also profoundly true, about a place like this. People come and go. Kings are crowned, then replaced by teenagers in hoodies. Regimes rise and fall. Revolutions rewrite calendars. But the stones, they stay. Until one day, they don't. Impermanence doesn't announce itself in advance. It simply waits. Places like Notre Dame teach you that. They wear their age like armor and like a warning. I step back just far enough to see the whole facade again, framed by the soft glow of the city. The towers, the rows, the portals, the kings, the gargoyles, all of it layered and textured, standing calmly in the dark. Most of the world right now is asleep or arguing or scrolling or worrying about emails. Meanwhile, this cathedral has quietly survived almost everything history could think to throw at it. Almost. Tonight, I say softly, we walk it while it still stands untouched. We follow the line of footsteps that led here, that passed here, that forgot to look up. We look up. We listen. We remember that even giants can fall. I turn toward the great bronze doors, where a thin seam of darkness waits between panels. The mist clings to my shoulders, as if it's not entirely sure I should go inside. I go anyway. Come on, I whisper to you. Let's see what 1,000 years of faith and stone sound like from the inside. And with that, I step out of the open square and toward the shadow of the doors, leaving the Parvis behind under the watchful eyes of gargoyles and the memory of one loud, solitary bell. Chapter 2. Thresholds and Echoes. The great bronze doors of Notre Dame are taller than they seem in photographs. Up close they feel like the entrance exam to a very old, very opinionated university. The metal glints faintly in the lamplight, its carvings softened by centuries of reverent hands and, let's be honest, thousands of tourists who absolutely did not read the "Please do not touch" signs. I curl my fingers around the cold lip of one door, lean my shoulder into it, and it gives way with a deep groan. Not a protest, more like the sound of an elderly professor rising from a chair and muttering about young people these days. The darkness inside breathes out first. Cool, incense-tinged air spills over me, the kind that makes your skin prickle and your thoughts slow down. It smells faintly of beeswax, stone dust, and prayers that evaporated decades ago but still refuse to leave. I step inside. The door settles shut behind me with a bass-heavy thud that ripples through the floor. Silence gathers around me like a cape. The cathedral is dim, but not unfriendly, more like a creature waking up just enough to acknowledge your presence without actually inviting conversation. I let my eyes adjust. Shapes emerge, rows of columns rising like pale giants, arches lifting above them in a graceful sweep, the long central aisle stretching into darkness like a river of shadow. Notre Dame at night feels strangely alive. Not in a "the statues are about to whisper your name" way, though, honestly, give them time, but in the sense that the building has its own pulse, a slow, steady thrum that travels through the stones and into the soles of your shoes. "All right, big guy," I whisper, because talking to historical architecture is a completely normal sleep story hobby. "Show me what secrets you've been hoarding." My voice floats up, absorbed by the ribbed vaulting. The echoes return soft and slow, like they're being careful not to wake the dead. I move toward the nave, boots treading softly on worn stone. The light in here comes from a scattering of votive candles, tiny embers glowing in red glass cups, flickering like a constellation trapped at ankle height. Shadows shift with each flame's wobble, sliding along the floor like patient ghosts. Off to the right, a small side chapel waits in half shadow. Something pulls me toward it, not spiritually, more like the universal human instinct to investigate suspiciously dim corners. The chapel is stone quiet. A modest altar sits near the back, framed by carved saints who all look vaguely concerned. A neat row of candles lines the rail, some tall and steady, some short and sputtering, some melted into abstract modern art. One in the center begins flickering violently. Once, twice, a frantic little dance, as if trying to get my attention. I stop walking, angle my lantern, and watch. The flame trembles harder, bending sideways like it's trying to escape, and then, with absolutely no draft on my skin, no breeze, no movement anywhere, it goes out, just frat, dark. Every other candle around it continues burning with the calm confidence of wax that has no idea what drama just happened. I raise an eyebrow. Well, that was either a polite warning or a strong review of my narration. Silence answers. The saints on the walls remain silent, though I swear one of them is giving me a look that translates to "behave." I step back into the nave, letting the chapel settle behind me. The air grows cooler again. the great space opening up around me. My footsteps echo off the far walls, more noticeable now that I've returned to the cathedral's central artery. Ahead, the north rose window looms in the darkness, a massive circular shadow. In daylight, it's an explosion of blues and purples, a cosmic kaleidoscope. At night, it becomes a staring eye made of silence and memory. I'm halfway down the nave when it happens. A sudden, heavy boom shakes the wall, not inside, outside. A gust slams against the north rose with the blunt force of a fist made of winter. The ancient glass shivers in its frame. There's a sound like a strained violin string, long, mournful, trembling dangerously close to a crack. I freeze. The window quivers again, visibly. A ripple of moonlight fractures across the colored panes. A soft moan escapes the stone around it, the building's old bones reacting to the impact. I catch my breath. This window has survived revolutions, bombs, weather older than my ancestry, and yet here it is, shuddering like a nervous cat because a Paris wind decided to show off. The vibration fades slowly, leaving the silence thicker and the air oddly charged. I walk closer, not too close, because I'm daring but not stupid, and study the enormous rose as it settles back into stillness. The tracery is delicate, almost impossibly thin for its size. The colored glass is hidden in the night, but its patterns are carved into the shape of the shadows. Even in darkness, it radiates a sense of importance. A reminder, I whisper, that even icons can be one bad day away from falling. The cathedral doesn't answer, but the air around me feels heavier, as if the stones have overheard the conversation and don't entirely disagree. I stand at the center of the nave for a moment, letting the silence wrap around me like a cloak. There is something humbling about being alone, in a place built by people who assumed their work would outlive them, and were mostly right. My lantern flickers once, probably just a draft, but the timing is a little too poetic for comfort. Okay, I murmur. Message received. Impermanence. Fragility. Don't mock the candles. Got it. The nave stretches out before me, pillars vanishing into shadow, arches curling upward, stained glass waiting for dawn. Ahead lies the transept, the choir, the treasury, the forest of beams above, places full of echoes and warnings the present doesn't yet hear. But for now, here in the nave, the story is whispering its first truths. Everything grand stands on borrowed time. Everything sacred can burn. Everything lasting lasts only until it doesn't. And somewhere in the rafters high above me, a faint creak reminds me that even stones have to breathe. I take a slow breath, calm and deep. All right, I say softly, let's keep walking. Chapter 3. Windows of Memory. The wide nave stretches out behind me as I slip into the north side aisle, the darkness folding in quieter here, softer. It always feels like the side aisles are where the cathedral keeps its unspoken thoughts, less grand than the center, more intimate, like pockets of memory tucked between the ribs of the building. Votive candles burn along the wall in glass cups the color of bruised fruit. Their flames flicker lazily, as if protesting the effort required to remain alive. They glow like tiny, stubborn stars, determined to outshine 8 centuries of dust, shadow, and existential weight. I walk slowly, letting each candle throw its little halo over my boots. The stone floor is uneven here, worn down by pilgrims who took shorter steps, heavier steps, more desperate steps. You can almost hear the old prayers if you tilt your head. Whispers smoothed into the limestone, layered so thick they've become part of the architecture. A small chapel sits recessed into the wall just ahead. I step inside. It's dimmer in here, and the air carries a faint, sweet scent of extinguished incense, smoke and memory intertwined. The altar is plain compared to the grandeur outside, but there's a dignity in its simplicity. A row of choir stalls frames one side, their carved wooden backs tall and ornate, as though someone challenged medieval carpenters to a competition, and they all refused to lose. I take one more step, and then, with the perfect comedic timing of a seasoned stage actor, one of the choir stalls creaks open, long and slow, a full-bodied moan of ancient wood, a hinge stretching awake after centuries of emotional repression. I freeze mid-step, one boot hovering above the stone like it's reconsidering its life choices. There's no draft, no footsteps, no movement, just one carved wooden seat swinging open like a ghostly invitation or a passive-aggressive rebuke. "Really?" I whisper into the quiet. Furniture that dramatic is definitely French. The stall holds its pose, angled enough to imply judgment. I ease backward, hands lifted in the universal gesture of, "I'm just browsing. Please don't possess me." Outside the chapel, the aisle feels lighter, as if the cathedral approves of my retreat. I continue toward the far end of the nave, the north rose window glowing faintly above the transept, like a darkened halo. Even unlit, it dominates the space, its geometry a perfect, labyrinthine wheel of stone and colored glass. It's strange how your eyes can sense its presence before you actually see it, like the window radiates an ancient confidence. Yes, I am 8 centuries old, and yes, I still look better than you do in any lighting. I drift closer, the columns tightening around me like a stone forest. The air grows colder, the silence deepens, almost there when I hear it. A frantic, aggressive flutter, feathers beating against air, the slap of wings hitting something solid, a sharp, panicked scramble echoing high above. I stop under an arch and look up. There, in the upper gallery between the stone balustrades and the stained glass lattice, a pigeon is trapped. Its silhouette jerks and thrashes against the colored glass. Each impact produces a tiny, pathetic thwump, a sound halfway between desperation and very bad decision-making. Feathers drift down through the gloom, twirling like gray snowflakes. The bird backs up, tries again. Thwump, again, thwump, and again, because pigeons, like humans, are capable of astonishing persistence in the pursuit of bad escape strategies. I step toward the transept, watching it navigate the geometry of panic. The poor thing flaps along the gallery, wings battering the ancient stone, searching for a weakness in the architecture. I feel a pang of sympathy. It's hard to watch something small and frantic try so hard to escape a place that humans traveled continents just to enter. Then, finally, it finds a narrow gap, a sliver of space in the lattice. It angles its wings, dives and shoots through the opening like a gray meteor of triumph. The pigeon bursts into the open air outside the window, disappearing into the Paris night. Silence folds back in. I stand still, letting the last drifting feather settle onto the stone. That little drama lingers in the air longer than it should. There's a metaphor hiding in it, one I don't fully unwrap, because this is a sleep story, and not my thesis defense. But the thought settles anyway. Creatures know when a place is dangerous long before people do. I walk forward, and now I'm directly beneath the north rose window. It towers over me, a massive circle of stone petals framing slices of colored glass, arranged in meticulous patterns, reds, blues, purples, greens, all held in place by tracery delicate enough to seem impossible. In daylight, this window becomes a sunburst. Tonight, it's an eye, watching the nave, watching me. Its circular ribs arch outward like the spokes of a cosmic wheel. The largest figures sit in the center, prophets and angels frozen mid-gesture, ringed by saints, ringed by patterns, ringed by stories long forgotten but stubbornly glowing when sunlight passes through their glass. Right now, the window rests in darkness, but even unlit, you can sense the history trapped inside it. This thing survived revolutions, revolts, world wars, artillery shells, looters, rebuilders, reformers, 1,000 political shifts and spiritual upheavals. And yet, as I stare up at the delicate architecture, my chest tightens. There's fragility here, thin stone ribs that have been vibrating in the wind since medieval masons first set them, glass that has endured centuries of storms but is still only a breath away from shattering. Impermanence whispers along the edges of the rows. It feels closer here, more intimate, more honest. I take a slow breath, and the quiet wraps around me again. This window has outlived kings, outlived empires, outlived the men who built it, men who probably never imagined their work would become a symbol the whole world recognized. But it will not outlive everything. No creation does, not even the beautiful ones, especially not the beautiful ones. I let that truth settle into the stone beneath my feet. It feels strangely gentle, like a reminder rather than a warning. "All right," I whisper. "Lead on." And with the north rose glowing faintly above me, I move deeper into the cathedral's shadowed heart. Chapter 4. Light and Burden. The further I move from the north rose, the more the cathedral seems to narrow its focus. The nave, with its long spine and vast echoing ribs, gives way to a more concentrated kind of space, the place where ceremony lives, where people came not just to stand and stare, but to kneel and hope. The choir rises ahead of me in a shallow step-up, a subtle shift in elevation that feels more significant than it looks. There's something quietly territorial about it, like the building saying, "Here, this part matters more." I cross the threshold. The air changes, warmer somehow and thicker with the ghosts of incense. Candlelight gathers in small huddled groups, reflecting off marble, gilding, and polished wood. It isn't bright. Notre Dame never does anything as obvious as bright at night, but it's enough to paint everything in a soft, honeyed glow that feels almost human. The choir stalls are tall and carved with the same overachieving attention to detail as everything else in this building. Figures climb the wood in spirals, saints, angels, foliage, the occasional creature whose theological classification I wouldn't dare guess. Their shadows stretch up the walls, gaining size and losing definition, like virtues and sins exaggerated in memory. I walk slowly between them, my footsteps dampened by worn stone and a film of centuries. This is the part of the cathedral that has heard more secrets than any confessional, more whispered confessions than any courtroom, more promises than any wedding venue on earth. I imagine coronations here, robes so heavy they might have needed their own attendants, crowns that pressed futures down onto nervous skulls. I imagine funerals that smelled like lilies and cold stone, the music climbing into the vaults, while grief tried not to show its teeth. I imagine the smaller things, a priest adjusting a candle, a child fidgeting in a pew, someone staring at the floor and bargaining silently with a god they weren't entirely sure was listening. The high altar sits ahead, luminous even in the half-dark. Candles cluster around it like courtiers. The marble gleams in places where hands have brushed it, where cloths have wiped it, where light has repeatedly chosen to die on its surface. I move toward it, lantern low. That's when I see the first spark, a tiny orange flicker in the air above me, then another, and another, At first, my brain files them under. You're tired, ignore the hallucinations. But then the smell arrives. Faint, metallic, a hint of something scorched. I tilt my head back. High, high above, where the stone vaulting cradles the roof structure, there's the faintest suggestion of movement. I can't see the worker, but I know the type of work. Maintenance on the roof, repairs, welding, cutting, any of the 1,000 little interventions humans use to keep old buildings from collapsing under the weight of their own stubbornness. Tiny sparks drift down from some unseen activity. The distance is so great that by the time they fall into view, they're already cooling, fading. They wink through the air like fireflies that never quite commit to being alive. None of them reach the floor. They just vanish, dissolving into darkness, leaving only the ghost of burnt dust behind. I sniff once, quietly. Well, I murmur, that doesn't feel ominous at all. It's nothing. It's routine. It's maintenance. Of course they're working on the roof. Of course. There are sparks. The building is old. It demands constant attention like a highly educated, deeply dramatic relative. Still, the idea of flame above this much wood, this much history, this much faith, it sits uneasily. Even tiny flame. Even controlled flame. I watch one last ember tumble down, glow, fade, and disappear before it reaches me. If you didn't know to look, you'd never see it. If you didn't know to smell, you'd never notice the trace of scorched air. But once you do, it's hard to unknow. I turn away from the altar, letting the candles reclaim their quiet dominance, and move toward the south side of the transept. The south rose window waits there, a sibling to the north, but with a slightly different soul. The path takes me up onto a shallow raised platform, the stone having been leveled and re-leveled across centuries of rearranged liturgies and altered tastes. My boots meet the step, and for a second, all seems well. Then the stone under my right foot moves. Not much, just the tiniest shift, a fraction of an inch, but that's enough. The sensation is wrong, startling, like something solid suddenly remembered it's tired. My balance tilts, my body pitches forward on instinct. At the last second, my hand shoots out and slaps against a nearby column. My palm meets cold stone. I catch myself. The noise I make is not dignified. We'll call it a sharp exhale with bonus consonants. For a heartbeat, I just stand there, heart ticking a little faster than I'd prefer. The lantern swings slightly in my hand, sending light skittering across the column's carved surface. Beneath my boot, the stone feels stable again, innocent even, as if to say, "What? I didn't do anything. You imagined that." I ease my weight off it, step sideways, and test it once, gently. There it is again, a subtle seesaw, like the stone is resting on a bed of dust and good intentions, instead of the immutable foundation of the earth. I glance up at the column. I'm using as support. Its surface is smooth in the way only centuries of contact can make something. Thousands of hands bracing, leaning, praying, pushing away. For a strange moment, I feel like one more name in a very long, very crowded ledger. Impermanence, until now, has been something I've felt in the abstract. The trembling of the glass, the flicker of the candle, the bird trapped in the gallery. But this is under my foot, literal ground that isn't as certain as it claims to be. All right, I breathe, half to myself, half to the building. Point taken. Nothing lasts. Message received. Let's not make it interactive again, yeah? The cathedral remains silent, but I could swear the column under my hand is humming with a kind of patient amusement. I step carefully off the uneven stone and continue toward the south rose window. This rose is warmer than its northern counterpart, where the north leans into cool blues and cosmic geometry. The south burns with golds and reds, sunset colors caught in little lead prisons. Right now, at night, most of that color is sleeping, but even in the darkness, the shapes are there, etched in the silhouette of the tracery. I stand beneath it, craning my neck. The circular frame seems to float above the transept like a halo grown too heavy to wear. The stone ribs radiate outward in intricate patterns, holding the glass in place the way fingers hold something fragile they're afraid to drop. The sparks from the roof are out of sight now, but the faint smell of scorched dust lingers in the back of my awareness, like a memory that won't quite leave the room. The loose stone still tingles in my mind, the flickering candle, the pigeon beating itself against unyielding glass, the rose window trembling in its frame. None of it dramatic by itself, just moments, just tiny things, tiny, temporary things. That's the uncomfortable truth the cathedral is teaching me in very slow motion. We build for forever, but forever has other plans. And sometimes those plans involve fire you can't yet see, and weight you don't yet feel, and stones that shift under feet that thought they were safe. I take a breath, square myself under the sleeping blaze of the south rose, and let the quiet press in again. Somewhere above, someone is working with metal and heat, thinking about schedules, not cathedrals. Somewhere beyond these walls, Paris is laughing in bars and scrolling through phones, not knowing that this building is quietly accumulating warnings. But you and I, we're here. We feel the loose stone. We smell the dust. We hear the faint music of a structure that knows it cannot hold forever. Come on, I whisper, turning back toward the shadowed interior. There's more to see before the match is ever struck. And I step away from the rose, careful where I place my feet. Chapter 5. The upstairs heartbeat. The transept crossing is where Notre Dame likes to remind you that time is not a straight line. It's a wheel spinning above your head. I step into the center of it, lantern held low. The space opens in every direction at once, north, south, east, west, like the cathedral is stretching its arms, showing off. Columns rise around me like the trunks of ancient trees, and far, far above, the vaulted ceiling blooms into delicate ribs of stone. Everything converges here. Gravity, symmetry, history, breath. It feels like standing inside a heartbeat. If the nave is the spine, this is the heart, and you can feel it. Not literally, thankfully. The last thing I need is a diagnosis from a 13th century architect, but there's a pulse here all the same. Layered, slow, immense. This spot has witnessed everything. Royal weddings that tried to outshine divinity, funeral processions that moved like grief carved in marble, war drums outside, and the announcements, sometimes whispered, sometimes shouted, of who lived, who died, and who had displeased the crown. It is a sanctuary and a stage, a refuge and a reminder, a place where people came to pray, and a place where other people came to make sure the prayers didn't work. I stand still in the middle of it, listening. The silence here is never empty. It's a full silence, the kind monks apprentice their whole lives to achieve. It swirls around the columns, slips under the arches, curls into corners like a cat settling down for a nap. My lantern throws long shadows across the floor. They stretch toward each transept like paths branching from a single moment, north to memory, south to firelight, east to resurrection, west to sunset. I could stay here, I could, but the story keeps tugging at my sleeve, asking me to move. I take a step toward the treasury. The corridor narrows slightly, the stone growing smoother as if centuries of palms have brushed it in passing. My footsteps are thin echoes now, swallowed before they get too ambitious. The treasury sits tucked away like the cathedral's private jewelry box, small, guarded, filled with things that aren't supposed to age. I'm halfway there when I notice it. Just a thread at first, a shimmer, a faint curl of smoke lifting like a question mark from a light fixture overhead. I stop. The fixture itself looks harmless enough, just a metal casing bolted into the ancient stone, but the air around it wavers slightly, as if something is warming it too quickly. I raise my lamp and watch. A tiny puff of smoke escapes from the seam of the housing. Not dramatic, not thick, just the smallest ghost of burnt dust rising, swirling once, then dissolving into the dark right above my head. Oh, good, I whisper. French wiring, always an adventure. I glance around, half expecting someone to emerge from the shadows with a toolbox or a fire extinguisher, or at least a shrug that says, "We, it does this sometimes." But no, just me, just the silence, just a hint of something that shouldn't be happening in a building that has every reason to fear fire more than sin. I touch the metal casing with 2 fingers. It's warm, too warm, not scalding, not dangerous yet, but warm enough to make the hair on my neck shift into advisory mode. The smoke curls again, so faint it looks embarrassed to exist. My brain, the same brain that narrates calmly through collapsing Soviet infrastructure and medieval prisons, files this moment under. Ominous foreshadowing. The universe really didn't need to make this on the nose. I lower my hand and back away slowly. Notre Dame is full of candles, incense, wood, ancient beams, and a roof structure that could out-dry the deserts of 3 continents. Mix in a spark and, well, let's just say this place is an overachiever in many categories, including flammability. I shake my head once and continue toward the treasury, because ignoring obvious danger has always been a tried and true human strategy. The treasury door sits slightly recessed, framed in stone so old it looks soft. I step inside, and the atmosphere changes immediately. The air feels denser, cooler, and sharp with the metallic scent of gold and silver, an impossible aroma, but unmistakable. My lantern paints the room in warm amber strokes. Here, the relics sleep. Glass cases line the walls, each one illuminated with careful, reverent light. Inside them are objects designed to defeat time, jeweled crowns with gemstones like frozen drops of sunrise, ornate chalices that once touched the lips of kings and bishops, silver crosses shaped by hands that have been dust for centuries. There's a fragment of ancient wood, darkened and polished by reverence, a ring that once proclaimed earthly power, a reliquary shaped like a tiny cathedral inside a cathedral, its spire crowned with light. Everything gleams quietly, as if rehearsing for eternity, and yet they feel oddly fragile now. Not physically. These objects have endured centuries of theft, war, revolution, humidity, and the occasional very clumsy monk. But the idea of them being safe, permanent, protected, that feels fragile, because I can still smell the faint hint of warm metal, because I can still imagine those sparks falling unseen, because even the most sacred vault isn't immune to the laws that govern everything else. I walk slowly along the cases, letting the lantern light ripple across gold filigree and gemstones. Every relic has a story. Every story is older than me, older than anyone listening, older than the city itself. But none of them are immortal. Time isn't impressed by diamonds. Fire isn't intimidated by holiness. And impermanence doesn't care how many saints signed the guest book. Funny, I whisper, how we lock up the things we think will outlast us, only for the world to shrug and say, "We'll see." My reflection moves in the glass, lantern raised, eyes softening with something like respect, not reverence. Reverence is for people who assume they're exempt from the ending. This is something else, something quieter, more honest, a recognition of the simple truth. Nothing stays, not cathedrals, not kings, not the treasures they leave behind. But for now, in this small room filled with ancient promises, everything holds a little longer. And outside these walls, far above our heads, something warm and careless stirs in the dark. Chapter 6. The Forest of Beams and the Shadow of Fire. For most people, the attic of Notre Dame is just a rumor, something they've seen in diagrams, documentaries, or a particularly enthusiastic episode of History Nerds Gone Wild. But to stand inside it, that's something else entirely. I climb the narrow stone staircase, lantern held close, boots brushing steps worn down by workmen who had no idea their footprints would survive longer than most empires. The air changes as I near the top, grows heavier, thicker, like it's soaked in the breath of centuries. Then the door gives way with a reluctant groan, and I step inside. The forest, that's what they called it. 800 years of oak beams, some older than the Black Death, some older than the concept of France, stretch above me in an endless tangle of massive timbers, each one hand-cut, hand-hewn, hauled up here when Paris still smelled like horses and questionable hygiene. The attic is enormous, but the ceiling presses low in places, forcing me to hunch. The beams overlap and intersect like the ribs of a mythic beast. The lantern light touches them and recoils. The shadows swallow more than they reveal. Dust hangs in the air like a fine, ancient mist. When I breathe, it tastes dry, woody, and tired, as if the beams themselves are exhaling through me. I take 3 cautious steps. That's when the first beam groans, a deep, low shudder, like a whale song, if whales lived in Gothic architecture and held grudges. The vibration travels through my boots, up my legs, into my spine, a sound older than memory, older than the idea of sound. And then dust rains down, not violently, not dramatically, just a slow, drifting cascade of tiny particles that glow as they pass through my lantern light. Snow made of centuries, silence made visible. Well, I whisper, that's comforting. Love when the building I'm standing in sighs like it's ready to retire. I move deeper into the rafters, navigating the wooden maze one careful footstep at a time. The beams stretch endlessly in every direction, thick as ship masts, blackened with age, carved by tools whose makers had names no one remembers. The forest feels alive, but not in a lively way, more in a grandmother who has been awake too long and is holding it together purely through spite kind of way. My lantern flickers as a gust of wind forces its way through some nearly invisible gap in the stone. The draft carries with it a long, thin whistle, one that echoes through the beams like a warning whispered between old friends. I follow the sound. The passage narrows, beams crowding overhead like elbows in a too small elevator. Dust coats everything. Every step leaves a little ghost footprint behind. Ahead, perched above the transept crossing, is the interior access point for the spire, the very spot where, years from now, fire will slither upward like a hungry animal and take the whole roof with it. I approach it slowly. Another gust blasts through the rafters, stronger this time, fueled by the winter air outside. The forest groans again, louder, longer. Timber shifts, settling under its own weight with the world weariness of something that's been holding civilization on its back for 8 centuries and is starting to reconsider the arrangement. Dust falls in a thicker drift, swirling around my boots. The air smells older here, and sharper. I can't see the outside world, but I can feel it. Paris wind funneling through cracks in the stone, brushing past beams that have outlived kings and tyrants and plagues. I step onto a raised platform of crossbeams leading into the spire's core. The moment my weight settles, the spire frame above me creaks. Not a gentle creak, not a polite creak, a full-bodied, aching, spine-deep exhale that rattles the bolts and hums through the wooden skeleton like a warning triggered by the future. My lantern shakes in my hand. The wind hits the roof again. The entire structure trembles, beam to beam, brace to brace, as if the cathedral is bracing itself against time itself. Below me, the nave lies in quiet majesty. Above me, the spire's bones sing their tired song, and around me, the forest waits, old and patient and fragile, in ways I can no longer pretend not to see. For the first time tonight, I stop narrating in my head. I just stand there, listening, feeling, understanding, because this is the hinge of history, not the fire itself, not the moment flames leap into the night sky, but this quiet second where the cathedral whispers the truth through every groaning beam. Even giants fall, even masterpieces burn, even sanctuaries are temporary. A tremor of dust drifts past my lantern, catching light like the last breath of something magnificent. Somewhere far below, deep in the nave, a single candle flickers harder than it should. Just one, but one is enough. The spire creaks again, a long, weary exhale, a promise, a prophecy. I take a slow step back from the interior frame, placing my boots carefully on the beams. My breath steadies, but the weight in the air doesn't lift. It lingers like a truth I wasn't meant to hear. The forest watches me leave with tired eyes. Down the staircase I go deeper into stone. The air grows cleaner, cooler, less heavy with the world's endings. My lantern dims with each step, the light shrinking like time closing its hand. When I reach the lower levels again, the cathedral feels different, not smaller, just more mortal, more honest, beautiful in the way only fragile things can be. I pause in the shadows, letting my voice soften. Some creations stand for centuries, but none stand forever, and maybe that's what makes them worth walking through. The lantern flickers once, twice. The stone under my boots exhales, and the night folds itself closed around us. Rest easy, sleepyheads. The sleepy circle remains, quiet and patient, until your steps return.